This video is for Goal 6 of the energy unit. It's the toughest because it makes you combine all the steps that we used previously. And you really have to figure out, we did this a progression. On Goal 4, we learned that total energy is the sum of the two energies and it's conserved, and you can work backwards and find potential and kinetic energy. In Goal 5, you learned that once you had potential and kinetic energy, you could find height and velocity. So in Goal 6, we're going to be using all of those skills, but without all the guided help, to be able to figure out how to find velocity and height. So notice that's what we're asking for. What's the velocity and what's the height at each position? But you're going to have to realize that it actually takes all those other steps to get yourself before you can solve for these. So the first thing you're going to do is figure out, what do I know at the top? What kinds of information can I solve for? So they're telling us the mass and they're telling us the height. So we can solve for potential energy here because potential energy is m times g times h. So our mass is 7, g is 10, and our height is 60. So 7 times 6 is 42. And then we'll add the zeros, one here and one here. So 4,200 is going to be our potential energy at the top. So now, all they give you is V. So you have to do some reasoning. You have to think, okay, I know that at the top, my velocity, it's going to be 0. And look at what's happening with this scenario. This guy is tossing a ball. It's going up, 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 and then at the very top, it has to stop just for a moment before it starts to fall back down. So we're going to assume that at this very top position, there's no V. So then if we think about what's our kinetic energy, if it's 1/2 mv squared, if we plug a 0 in for V, then the kinetic energy has to be 0 also. So that leads us to what's our total energy. If our potential energy is 4,200, our kinetic energy is 0, then we add them up to get our total energy of 42,000. So why is that useful? The step is not written anywhere here. But for you to answer the rest of these problems, you're going to have to know the total energy at each position, middle and bottom, and you're going to have to work backwards to find out what the potential and what the kinetic energy is at each place, and then you can solve for V and H. So if we know the total energy at the top is 4,200, then we know at the middle, the total energy has to be 4,200. So if we know that, we're going to have to figure out KE and PE, and then we can find V from the KE, and maybe from the H we can find PE. Although in this case, we don't have enough information. We're going to have to do a little bit of reasoning. If we know this is the halfway point, which it is, then if our height to the top is 60 meters, then this height must be 30 meters if it's halfway up or down. Okay, and that also, while we're on that same path, we know the height at the bottom is 0. So, can we solve for the potential energy halfway down? Yes, because potential energy is m times g times h. So our mass is 7, g is 10, and our height is 30. So 7 times 3 is 21, plus 2 zeros. So halfway down, our potential energy is 2,100, which, notice, is half of what it was here, which totally makes sense. So if our potential energy is 2,100, what must our kinetic energy be to equal our total energy of 4,200? It must be 2,100. Once we know our kinetic energy, then we can use our equation, KE equals 1/2 mv squared, to solve for V. So I'm going to plug in my kinetic energy of 2,100. I'm going to put in my 1/2, and I'm going to put in my mass, which is 7, and I'm going to solve for V. So I'm going to do that by simplifying. 2100 equals 3.5 v squared. Divide both sides by 3.5. So I'm going to do that with my calculator. 2100 divided by 3.5 equals 600. So I have 600 equals v squared. Then I have to remember to take the square root of both sides. So I take the second function square root button, and then I can either enter 600 or I can just do second function answer, and it would get me the same thing. So I end up with 24.5 meters per second is my speed halfway down. So it started at 0. It's speeding up. So what would we expect for our final velocity? Hopefully a bigger answer than that. If I look at my bottom section, I've got my total energy.
Just want to say goodbye.
Okay. So I've got 4,200 joules of total energy. We know that at the bottom, the potential energy, m times g times h, must be 0 because there's no height. So all of the kinetic energy is 4,200 joules. So I'm going to use that same equation I just did to solve for the velocity. So kinetic energy is 4,200. 1/2, my mass is still 7, and I'm going to solve for v. So this was 3.5. Oops, I put an extra 0 in there. So 4,200 divided by 3.5 divided by 3.5 equals 1,200 equals v squared. Just take the square root of both sides. So that would end up being 34.6. So my velocity turns out to be 34.6 meters per second.